Hi everyone, thanks for coming today. My name is Simonette. I am the Environment Project Officer at the City of Casey, and today we're going to be talking about the frogs that live within the City of Casey. We'll have a look at some of their habitats, so where they live, and also the different frogs that we have here and how you at home can help protect these frogs into our future because they're really important for our environment. So as we go through the slides, keep an eye out for our little gentleman frog up there in his top hat in the right hand corner. He'll hop into the slides and let's see how many times he pops up. Well, most of you already know what a frog is, but let's quickly go over it just to refresh our memories. A frog is an amphibian. They are cold-blooded, which means that, like reptiles, they rely on an external heat source to heat their bodies. They live in water and on land. They have a smooth or bumpy, thin, slimy, moist skin, and this skin is quite delicate and it's permeable, and it allows frogs to breathe, drink, and protect themselves. And being covered in a thin layer of mucus, this is what gives them that slimy feeling. And they also come in lots of different colours. Now, most frogs are the same colour as their environment for camouflage, but there are some really cool coloured frogs, and most of these frogs have these bright colours to warn other animals that they may be poisonous or don't taste very nice. These are the corroboree frogs, and as you can see, they're quite small little frogs. That's one person holding 4 little frogs in their hand. And these are the poison dart frogs. So these ones aren't found in Australia, these are from overseas, and they come in quite different colours. This one here looks like he's doing some push-ups. And we have this red one with blue feet. Now this is the red-eyed tree frog. He lives in trees. As you can see, he's got those sticky pads on his fingers and toes, and he is an Australian frog. So you'll find him up in Queensland and in the rainforests up there. Now toads, they have a tougher, drier skin and they usually live on land, but they are frogs. They've got a gland on the back of their head just behind his eye. You can see that big bulging section, and this will secrete a poison. So they are just a different subclass of frogs. Their skin still has the same functions as a frog's does. They can breathe, and there's actually 4 different ways a frog can breathe. They breathe through their lungs, their nostrils, the lining of their mouth, and through their skin. Now, because toads are so much thicker skinned than frogs are, and they're not so slimy. This one here's a cane toad. He's a pest up in Queensland. They've actually turned frogs into leather, and they've, just like crocodiles, they'll make bags and other jewelry and things from their skin. So just quickly, I'm sure you all know the life cycle of a frog. Areas where frogs live, it's essential that there is water because they start their life off with eggs and they turn into tadpoles. And the tadpoles need water to survive. And so as they grow, their tails disappear and their legs start to grow until they look like an adult frog. So let's have a look at some of the habitats where they live. So you can find them in wetlands, and there are plenty of wetlands around the city of Casey. These 2 pictures are actually wetlands within the city of Greater Dandenong. The bottom picture is Tahatchuan Park, and the top one is the Pencil Park or Hidden Grove wetland. But we've got Frog Hollow Reserve in Casey. We've got the Berwick Springs estate where there is all the wetland systems there, and all the new estates within the housing development areas will have wetlands in them where they will be perfect habitat for frogs. You can find them in rivers and creeks. So we've got Dandenong Creek, which runs along the western boundary, and Yumemiring Creek in Casey, and we've also got Cardinia Creek running down the east. We've got Billabong's Gardens and ponds, so people can create frog-friendly ponds in their garden. Lakes and dams are another really good spot for frogs to live. Even ditches along the sides of the road. Many frogs will find that as a suitable habitat, and that's where they breed. And even after it rains, you'll get frogs that come and lay their eggs in puddles. And you'll see little tadpoles swimming around in them. And they also live in trees near wetlands and in rainforests. And this is the green tree frog, and you'll find him up in New South Wales and Queensland. And he's up there having a snooze in the tree. So, why are frogs important? There are many reasons why frogs are important. And one of the main ones is that they tell us if a habitat is healthy. And when a habitat is healthy, this is what it should sound like. So as I mentioned earlier, frogs have that really special skin that they can breathe through and absorb things. And if they're in a polluted area, then you probably wouldn't hear the frogs because they wouldn't be able to survive. So frogs being in wetlands is really important. And as you can see, there are lots of different animals here and they all interact together and rely on each other. So they eat insects and bugs. Could you imagine a world that didn't have frogs? How many bugs would there be out there? And especially things like mosquitoes. Mosquitoes start their life just like frogs do, in the water. So all the little tadpoles and adult frogs will eat that mosquito larvae so we don't have too many mosquitoes. They're also food for other animals. And as I mentioned before, they've got that special covering on their skin, so it's a good idea not to touch frogs because we don't want to damage them. So there are many threats to frogs. Some of those are just the natural predators, so things that they encounter in their everyday life that would naturally feed on them. So that could be other frogs, fish, birds, and reptiles. So as you can see here, there's a kookaburra having a lovely snack on a frog. Many of the water birds will eat frogs. You see them wading around in the water. Even lizards. Foxes, dogs, and cats are a big problem for our frogs, especially those introduced ones. So foxes are very good hunters and they can really damage the population of frogs. Your cats, if you let them roam around outside, they love hunting and they will actually hunt frogs and birds and lots of other animals. So it's a good idea to keep them locked up inside. And when you're going on walks, make sure you keep your dog on a lead so he doesn't run through the wetlands and scare all the fish and the birds and the frogs. So the loss of habitat and having their homes destroyed is another big problem. And as you can see, it's very destructive. And these are some new developments that are within Casey. And you can see how many houses are going into these areas. This one here is along Cardinia Creek. And you can see how close those houses are coming to the wetland areas. Drought is another problem that is facing our frogs. As the weather changes and climate change impacts, we're finding that we're not getting as much rain and our wetlands are drying up. And if our wetlands dry up, then there is nowhere for our frogs to live. Pollution is another big problem. So as I mentioned, with their special skin, all those chemicals that may end up in the water is very bad for our frogs and can make them sick. And there's also a disease called citrid fungus, which is a problem with our frogs if it gets into our wetland areas. So frogs play an important role in our waterways and ecosystems, and they're easily affected by changes to their environment. So it's a good idea, and it's important for us to look after these habitats. So this is one of our common frogs in City of Casey. This is the eastern common froglet, and up the top there you can see how big he is compared to a $1 coin. So these are about 20 to 30 millimeters. They're a ground dwelling frog, and they come in a variety of colors and patterns in shade of brown, and their belly, if you flip them over, is black and white with different patterns on it. And instead of having webbed feet like frogs normally have, these have little fringing on their toes. And they can be heard calling year round at any time of the day, and they actually sound like pebbles being rubbed together. And they are found in most habitats near the water, from the wet forests to dry grasslands, and they are disturbed areas, and in puddles after the rain is another spot where they're found. So the southern brown tree frog. We've got two tree frogs that live in Casey, and this is the smaller of the two. He's also called the Ewing's frog, or just the brown tree frog, and one of the most common frogs in Melbourne. He grows to 30 to 50 millimeters, and as you can see in the picture on the little leaf there, he's got little pads on his toes to help him climb, just like that red-eyed tree frog that I showed earlier. They're great at climbing and jumping, and they've got that dark line, which is a good way to identify them, that runs down from their nose all the way to their shoulder through their eye. They are common in backyards and in high rainfall areas, and they're found in most habitats that we mentioned earlier, including in people's swimming pools. If you find tadpoles in your swimming pool, it's usually the southern brown tree frog that has laid his eggs in there, or her eggs in there. You often find them in ground level vegetation, and they're often heard after it rains. They'll also call all year. The spotted marsh frog. Okay, these are getting into some bigger frogs now, and their first name means Lord of the Swamp. So spotted marsh frog, Limnodynastes. Limnodynastes means Lord of the Swamp. And they're a spotted frog with green spots, as you can see, which is another name that they go by. So they're spotted frog or the spotted grass frog, and they grow up to about 45 millimeters. They like hiding under rocks and logs during the day, and one of their features that we use to identify them is their beautiful golden eye. They're related to the striped and pobblebonk frogs, which we will cover next. They're cousins. And these frogs will call almost all year round, and males hide in the plants near water's edge and call from there to their females. And they're one of the first frogs that will move into constructed wetlands, so man-made wetlands. And their call sounds like two pieces of wood being knocked together. The striped marsh frog. Okay, he's also called a night frog, a swamp frog, brown striped frog, but better known as the striped marsh frog. So he grows up to 65 millimeters, so he's bigger than some of the other frogs we've looked at, and some individuals have a pale stripe running down their back, as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side. The top half of their eye is golden, but the bottom half is brown, unlike the spotted marsh frog. And they will call almost all year, and they sound a bit like a chicken's cluck, as we will hear. And they will live where there is water, pools, waterways, swamps, and wetlands. He did sound like a bit like a chicken, didn't he? Okay, the pobblebonk, also known as the eastern banjo frog or the southern bullfrog. And this is the second largest frog that we're going to look at today, and he grows up to 70 millimeters. Okay, now these frogs are actually a burrowing frog, and you will often find them, and it will be this frog. If you're digging in your garden and you find a frog, this is who it will be. Okay, so he's got a puffy gland on the back legs, and he's got a light coloured raised gland that kind of runs under his eye to his shoulder. And it's normally orange in colour. And these frogs don't need water as much as the other frogs, and they're our big fat frogs. And they make a real bonk sound. So this is our last frog we're looking at today. This is the growling grass frog, or the southern bell frog, or green and golden frog. So this is the largest frog we have in Casey, and he grows up to 100 millimeters. He's a handsome frog, as you can see here, and they can either be bronze, dark moss green, to a bright lime green like this one here. And they have a bright blue groin and thighs, and a warty back. So this tree frog, yes, he's a tree frog, is one that lives on the ground around permanent wetlands, dams and ponds. So he doesn't actually live in trees like our other southern brown tree frog we have. And he eats other frogs, lizards and baby snakes. You will hear the males calling from August to April, and they're a rather interesting calling frog. And they are also endangered in Victoria. So how can we look after frogs? Well, there are lots of things that you can do. We can protect their habitat. We can keep their waterways clean from rubbish. We can keep our dogs on leads when we take them on walks, and we can keep our cats inside. Another thing you can do that you can do at home is record frogs. You could build a frog pond, and you can create wildlife-friendly gardens to attract the food that these frogs like to eat. So if you would like to do some recording of frogs at home, there's a really cool app that you can get, which is called the Frog Census app. And it's a program run by Melbourne Water, and there's lots of information in this app. You can look at the different frogs that I've just mentioned and see lots of information on them. You can submit reports and see maps where other people have recorded frogs. So the best time to record frogs is whenever you hear them calling. So usually around nighttime and on dusk, and especially on cloudy and warm, wet nights is a good time to hear frogs, because that's when they can come out and they feel safe because there's no bright moon to show where they are, and they can avoid the predators and stay out of the sun so they don't dry out because they need to conserve their moisture. And so a frog, when it's calling, it's the male frog calling, and what he's doing is he's advertising where he is because he's trying to get a girlfriend, and all the female frogs will come and visit his spot if he's the best sounding frog. So here's a page that just shows you what the information on each of the frogs looks like. It tells you when they will call, and it has a few pictures as well. So it's good for identifying frogs as well. If you want to build a frog pond in your yard, we've got a brochure that we can drop off at the libraries for you to pick up, and it tells you all the fantastic features that you need to include in your frog pond that will make great habitat and homes for frogs, and lots of other critters and creatures that might visit your yard. Just like the growling grass frog. Look at him sitting there in that pond. Doesn't he look happy? Okay, so this brochure also tells you some of the things that you should and shouldn't do if you've got a frog pond, and how to protect the frogs that are there. So yeah, thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, you can pop them in the chat, or you can also send an email to Casey, and there's a few other resources there for you as well. So thank you for listening, and I hope you've learnt something a little bit about the frogs within the city of Casey today.